So I think we can all agree that No Man's Sky was a game full of controversy and disappointment. But who should take ownership of that debacle? Sony or the developer, Hello Games? Let's give that some thought. What is going on, you beautiful thought-having people, you? Give it thought back in your day for another No Man's Sky discussion video. And today I wanted to ask the question, who's to blame for No Man's Sky? And the reason I wanted to address this in video form was that I get a lot of comments blaming Sony or Hello Games for all the shortcomings of the game. It never seems to be split down the middle with most people. And I'm not saying anyone is wrong necessarily, both companies had their hands in the marketing for this game. Sony produced the trailers which showed off many features that were left out of the final game, and Hello Games spokesperson and co-founder Sean Murray spouted off gameplay mechanics for No Man's Sky like he was producing the 8th wonder of the world in video game form. So there's no excuse for either of them. But who takes the cake on this? What I mean is, who should be receiving the flack for all the seemingly fraudulent claims about this game? To make an attempt at answering that question, let's first look at Sony. As I said before, Sony served as publisher for No Man's Sky, but only for the physical PlayStation 4 copies. They had nothing to do with the PC editions or the downloadable versions on the PlayStation Store. And because they published the game, some players may have been led to think that big bad Sony fostered such lacking gameplay with their own funds. But as you will see with this quote, that is not true. And this is from The Guardian. Sony, whose successful video game division is dedicated to funding and nurturing game development talent, offered Hello Games financial support. Murray turned down the funding, instead requesting a prime segment during the Japanese company's E3 2014 press conference. This was done to drum up hype for the game, which would prove deadly later. I'm not saying that Hello Games never received funding from Sony. I think they did after their offices were flooded in late 2013. But what I am saying is that there's no evidence for it, thus I am unable to argue against Sony for this. But there is some blood on Sony's hands, however. In an interview covered by GameSpot, Sony's UK managing director, Fergal Gara, had a few boastful things to say about their involvement with the game, and I quote, "No Man's Sky has been treated as if it was from one of our own internal studios." So here we can see that Sony was right behind the small development studio, so much so that a high-ranking employee claimed that they were treating them just as well as you would say Sony Japan Studios or Sony Santa Monica, which are two in-house studios that produce some of their best-selling and exclusive titles. Gara went on to say, "We are not going to treat it any differently, and we are going to put the full weight of the PlayStation behind it. If it all comes together as well as expected, it will be treated like a first-party release. It is not a self-published small indie title on the platform." But as we all have seen, it did not come together as Sony or Hello Games hoped it would. Apparently it performed below expectations enough that Sony was willing to ignore their refund policy for a short amount of time and give players who digitally downloaded the game refunds. That, my dear viewers, is not how you treat an in-house studio. So far, the only Sony-connected official that has defended the game is an ex-employee who called the players thieves for wanting a refund. Since release, it is easy to see that Sony has washed their hands of this game and are no longer behind it. Rumors of an Xbox One release have been swirling around for the past couple of weeks, so if Sony were still truly behind this game, that would never happen. As we can see, Sony does have some skin in the game of No Man's Sky, but is it all on their shoulders? I don't think so. Hello Games is certainly guilty for building up that hype train that inevitably crashed. Like I mentioned before, Sean Murray declined funding from Sony to show off his game at press conferences. I imagine this was a strategic move so that he could request more funding in the future, but again, we have no evidence of this. But this is not the only event curated by Murray that turned the wild public eye onto No Man's Sky. That rhymed. Murray took a meeting with Steven Spielberg, the famous director of such classics like E.T. and Close Encounters of the Third Kind, movies that prove Spielberg's interest in sci-fi. It is not known if the director was impressed by the demo that was shown at his Los Angeles apartment, but it is safe to say that this was a fantastic publicity stunt. Elon Musk, founder of SpaceX and Tesla Motors, even tweeted about trying No Man's Sky, writing, "We'll try out No Man's Sky this weekend." To which Murray was quick to respond, publicly I might add, with, "I'll hook you up with a free code." The only meeting Hello Games did decline with a celebrity was, oddly enough, Kanye West. But that was because they were already meeting with Musk and Spielberg that day. But declining a sit-down with Mr. West was an attention grabber in and of itself. I mean, who turns down Kanye? Well, I guess there's Mark Zuckerberg. But I digress. People have been calling Sean Murray a liar since the release of No Man's Sky, and some do have evidence to back that up. I have spoken ad nauseum about the lack of multiplayer in the final game, as well as other features like landing on asteroids, destroying space stations, and crashed freighters on planets. So if you need more of that, I'll direct you to onemanslie.info. There's a link in the description. But there is one relevant court case that I have brought up before, and I'll do it again here. That is the case against Aliens Colonial Marines for false advertising. To make a long story short, because I have already done a video on that, Sega and Gearbox were sued in a class action lawsuit and were accused of falsely showing features that were not in the final game. And one thing I never brought much attention to, well until now, was that Gearbox, which was the developer of Aliens Colonial Marines, was dropped from the case. In other words, they were no longer involved in the scandal after a court deemed them not guilty of the accusations. So going by that legal model, in the eyes of the law, Sony would be culpable for the wrongdoings of Hello Games. Look at it like this. Gearbox developed the Aliens game, created the misleading trailer footage, and later gave the final deceptive game to Sega to publish. Sega could have declined and told them to go back and make it more like the trailer, but they released it anyway. I feel like the same situation is going on here with Sony. But here's the kicker. Hello Games published the digital editions of the game, making them guilty as well. So I've said all that to say this. Whether you look at it ethically or legally, both parties are at fault. It is not one or the other. Both Hello Games and Sony deceived players to make money. And even though I thoroughly enjoyed No Man's Sky and will continue to support Sony, even I can see that I, along with a whole lot of other people, were lied to by both of them. I don't know what consequences should be served up to them, but something needs to happen. As far as we've seen, no legal action has been taken, so I'll leave it up to the court of public opinion. Maybe people will be more hesitant to pre-order games, maybe they'll be more suspicious of review embargoes, and maybe less money will be spent that way. That is the only form of justice I see happening. But before I go, I want to ask what you think. Do you still see Sony as the mastermind behind all this? Or is it that lying Sean Murray who is to blame? Or did you see it as a joint effort from the start? And lastly, was it the public's fault for buying into all the hype in the first place? Tell me about it down in the comments. But I think that's where I'm going to end today's video. If you enjoyed this video, why not check out yesterday's Final Fantasy 15 news update? It was all about how guns were finally confirmed for the game. All you have to do to watch that is click the annotation for the video on the right. And as always, there are links in the description for everything I mentioned here. And before you go, why not hit that subscribe button? It's been really nice seeing all the new subscribers, as I've said before, so thank you for doing that. Alright, I think that's it for me today. Thank you so much for watching, and remember, give thought to everything.